Part 1. The Ancient Tree in the Deep Forest. In a remote mountainous region, where mist shrouded the paths and vast forests stretched endlessly, there stood an ancient tree in the heart of the wilderness. Its trunk was massive, requiring 3 people to encircle it, its rough bark covered in green moss, resembling an old man who had weathered centuries of time. Its roots dug deep into the rocky soil, drawing cool water from hidden underground springs, while its broad canopy reached toward the sky, providing shade for chattering sparrows and playful squirrels. The villagers at the foot of the mountain called it Grandfather Tree, believing that within its aged wood resided a spirit, perhaps a forest deity or simply the lingering memory of nature from a bygone era. On full moon nights, silver light filtered through its leaves, illuminating the faint, swirling patterns on its trunk. The village children often shared tales of wonder, that Grandfather Tree could speak, or that it once saved a lost hunter by extending its branches to guide him home. The adults dismissed these as fanciful stories, but they still revered the tree, and no one dared to cut it down. That is, until one early spring morning, when a cold wind swept through the valley, carrying with it the sound of hooves and human voices. A group of loggers, led by Luke, a tall, sturdy man with calloused hands from years of wielding an axe, arrived at the tree's base. They didn't come with malice, but because the village needed good timber for construction. Gazing at Grandfather Tree, Luke sighed, "It's a beautiful tree, but if we leave it too long, it'll fall on its own. Better we take its wood and make something lasting." After some discussion, they agreed to fell it. The sound of axes rang out in steady chops, mingling with the rustle of falling leaves. The ancient tree toppled in the forest silence, as if accepting its fate. A large log, over 3 meters long, was cut from its strongest section and hauled back to the village by a pair of weary pack horses. Part 2. The Log Meets Uncle Tam. The log was brought to the workshop of Uncle Tam, a renowned carpenter in the region. Uncle Tam was over 60, his hair white as snow, his back slightly hunched from decades bent over his workbench, but his hands remained strong and his eyes sharp as they were in his youth. His workshop sat at the edge of the village, beside a small stream where the gurgling water blended with the daily rhythm of chisels and saws. People said he wasn't just a carpenter but an artist, for every piece he crafted carried a story, a soul. When the log was placed in front of his workshop, Uncle Tam stepped out, leaning on his cane, and studied it for a long while. The log was rough and heavy, still carrying the scent of fresh sap and forest earth. He ran his hand over its rugged bark and murmured, as if speaking to an old friend, "You've come from the deep forest, so you must have plenty of tales to tell. Don't worry, I'll give you a new form, so you can live on in this world." To him, every piece of wood had its own character, and a carpenter's job was to listen, understand, and transform it into something meaningful. He called over his 2 apprentices, Little T, a 15-year-old boy, quick and mischievous, and Man, 18, quiet and diligent. "Look at this log, you two," he said, his voice warm and steady. "It's big, solid, with beautiful grain. I'm planning to make a wooden bed frame, the kind that lasts for generations. Will you help your teacher?" Little T nodded eagerly, his eyes sparkling, while Man simply replied, "Yes, sir," and began gathering tools. Part 3. Transformation under the craftsman's hands. Work began the next day. Uncle Tam stood in the middle of the workshop, measuring carefully with an old, worn tape measure, then marking the first lines on the log with white chalk. The loud rasp of a large saw filled the air as he and his apprentices sliced the log into thick planks. Each cut was a steady breath, like the heartbeat of the log revealing its inner beauty. The wood grain emerged, swirling like rivers winding through mountains, shimmering in the morning sunlight streaming through the window. Uncle Tam paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and smiled with satisfaction. Wood this good deserves to be a bed frame. Anything less would be a waste. Next came the planing. Man gripped a large plane, pushing it in long, smooth strokes to flatten the rough planks. Sawdust flew everywhere, clinging to their hair and clothes, but no one minded. Little T was tasked with sanding the edges smooth with sandpaper, though he grumbled under his breath, "My arms are getting tired from all this sanding, teacher." Uncle Tam chuckled, "This trade requires patience, son. You can't rush wood, and you can't rush yourself." The hardest part was crafting the legs of the bed frame. Uncle Tam personally selected 4 smaller sections from the original log and sat down with a small carving knife in hand. He sketched a design of dragon symbols of strength and eternity on paper first, then began to carve. Each stroke was slow and deliberate, as if he were painting a picture on the wood. The dragons took shape, their curves graceful, their eyes sharp, their scales glinting. Little T watched in awe. "Teacher, your carving is so beautiful, it's like the dragons are alive." Uncle Tam nodded, "It has to be beautiful, because this bed frame isn't just for lying on, it's for people to remember." Part 4, the finishing touches and a new life. The workshop buzzed with activity for weeks. Some nights, long after the village had fallen asleep, the glow of an oil lamp still flickered inside. Uncle Tam sat alone with the wood, working and talking to it as if it could hear, sharing stories of the bed frames he'd made before, of the families they'd brought joy to. It was as if the log listened, quietly transforming under his hands from a rough block into a work of art. After nearly 2 months of tireless effort, the bed frame was complete. It stretched over 2 meters long and nearly a meter wide, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen, its legs sturdy and adorned with intricately carved dragons. Uncle Tam stepped back, wiped his brow, and nodded, "It's done. You've got a new life now." The bed frame was delivered to the home of Mr. B.A., a wealthy villager who had commissioned it for his son's upcoming wedding. The day it was placed in the main room of Mr. Ba's house, the whole village came to see. They marveled at its beauty. Mr. B.A. beamed with pride, inviting Uncle Tam to sit on it first and pouring him a cup of tea. The bed frame wasn't just furniture, it became the heart of the home. In the evenings, Mr. Ba's family gathered on it, sharing stories and laughter. On hot summer days, the children sprawled across it for naps, dreaming of far-off forests. And whenever guests visited, Mr. B.A. proudly recounted its journey from an ancient tree in the wild to the skilled hands of Uncle Tam. The big log, once a silent giant in the forest, was no longer part of that world. It had found new purpose in the lives of people, carrying with it the breath of nature and the soul of the old carpenter. And somewhere, in the shimmering grain of the wood, the whispers of the old forest wind seemed to linger, telling the tale of its wondrous journey.